You think the motorcycle you're dreaming about right now is the smart purchase. It isn't, and the math on that mistake shows up about 18 months after you sign the paperwork. Every year, riders walk into a dealership, fall in love with the spec sheet, and walk out with a bike that's going to cost them more in regret than it ever will in gas money. Most of them won't figure out why until the first big service bill, the first insurance renewal, or the first time they try to sell it. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which Kawasaki's fall into that trap, and why loving a motorcycle isn't the same as being ready to own it. I've watched a guy roll a nearly new supercharged Kawasaki into a shop, certain something was mechanically wrong with it. Nothing was wrong with the bike. The problem was that he bought a machine engineered for a completely different kind of rider than himself, and no amount of wrenching was going to fix that mismatch. That's the pattern you're about to see 7 times. Here's exactly what's happening, and what it means for you before you buy. Quick ask before we get into it. If you're the kind of rider who likes knowing this stuff before you buy, not after, go ahead and subscribe now. Alright, let's get into it. We're starting cheap, because even the cheapest bike on this list can bite you. The KLR 650 has a reputation as the simple, go-anywhere, affordable adventure bike, and for the most part, that reputation is earned. The 2026 KLR 650 starts at $6,999 without ABS and $7,299 with ABS. That's about as accessible as adventure riding gets. But here's the catch mechanics keep running into. The 2008 model year and some early second-generation examples are repeatedly associated with oil consumption concerns caused by early piston ring and cylinder bore issues. That does not mean every KLR burns oil. It means if you're shopping used and you land on one of those specific years or a bike that's been neglected, you need to check oil consumption before you hand over cash, not after. While you're at it, ask about the doohickey, the balancer chain tensioner arm that KLR owners have been upgrading for decades. It is a cheap part, but a failed one can cause real engine damage, and it is just as relevant to a pre-purchase check as the oil issue. The KLR is also heavy and underpowered compared to modern adventure bikes, so buyers expecting current generation performance are going to be disappointed regardless of the engine's health. And this is where a cheap purchase price gets dangerous in a way an expensive one does not. A buyer who just paid $7,000 for a new KLR or far less for a used one often has very little financial cushion left for a surprise engine rebuild. Someone shopping a $30,000 motorcycle has usually already budgeted for the unexpected. Someone chasing a bargain-priced used KLR frequently has not. And that gap is exactly where ownership regret grows fastest. This is not a bad bike. It is a bike where the smart buyer does their homework on the specific year and the specific example, instead of assuming cheap KLR automatically means safe KLR. If a $7,000 bike can still trap an unprepared buyer, imagine what happens when the price and the ego start climbing. The H2 SE is a supercharged naked bike, and on paper, that sounds like the best of both worlds, usable ergonomics with absurd power. At $21,999 MSRP, it is not a cheap toy. And that is exactly the point. This bike offers more power than most riders can responsibly use on a public street, in a naked bike body that invites you to use it constantly because there is no fairing, no windscreen, nothing standing between you and the throttle. Mechanics are not worried about reliability here. The engineering is respected. What they are worried about is ownership math. You are paying a premium price for performance you will rarely access legally, and the temptation to access it illegally is built into the character of the bike. It is not that the H2 SE is impossible to maintain. It is that it is overkill for the buyer who wants a fun street bike and ends up with a machine that dares them to make bad decisions every time they twist the wrist. If a naked hyper-naked bike can be too much bike, Wait until you see what happens when Kawasaki puts a track-bred, race-proven engine into a body most owners will only ever ride on the street. Let's be clear about something up front. The ZX-10R is not on this list because it's a bad motorcycle. It's here because used leader bikes can be cheap to buy and expensive to survive. The standard ZX-10R starts at $16,999 without ABS and $17,999 with ABS, already a serious financial commitment before tires, insurance, and service enter the picture. The limited production ZX-10RR, Kawasaki's homologation special variant with upgraded internals, sits in a different price bracket entirely at around $29,999. So don't assume the two badges share a price tag. But the real danger on either bike is in the used market. A used ZX-10R or ZX-10RR requires careful inspection for crash damage, evidence of track use, poor aftermarket tuning, wheelie abuse, neglected chains, and cheap modifications. This is a track-capable machine that most owners ride on the street, where they'll use a fraction of its performance envelope and still pay the full ownership penalty in tires, brakes, insurance premiums, and consumables. The bike isn't unreliable. The used examples floating around the market are frequently the product of riders who bought the fantasy, abused the machine chasing that fantasy, and then quietly listed it once reality caught up. You're not buying a bad motorcycle. You're potentially buying somebody else's bad decisions. Think about what that used listing actually represents. Someone bought a track-capable superbike, told themselves they'd take it to a track day eventually, and instead spent a year commuting on it, wheeling it in parking lots, running the chain dry, and skipping services because it still runs fine. Then the payment got uncomfortable, or the insurance renewal arrived, and suddenly it's a clean title, low miles listing online. Low miles doesn't mean low stress. That's the myth mechanics keep fighting. Mileage tells you distance, not treatment. On a leader bike, treatment matters more than almost anything else on the spec sheet. Leader bikes at least announce what they are. The next bike on this list is dangerous specifically because it doesn't look dangerous at all. If you're the kind of rider who actually checks a bike's history before buying, instead of just falling for the price tag, subscribe now, because that's exactly the mindset the rest of this list rewards. And drop a comment telling me which one of these 7 surprised you the most so far. The Concours 14 has built a reputation as one of the smartest used sport touring buys in the Kawasaki lineup, and used correctly, it can be exactly that: fast, comfortable, capable of covering serious distance. The problem is what the bargain price tag doesn't tell you. This bike is listed around 690 pounds with saddlebags fitted. That's not a light sport tourer. That's a big bike ownership experience wearing a good used deal price tag. Buyers who see a low asking price and assume they've found an affordable, easy to live with motorcycle often don't account for what that weight means at parking lot speeds, in a U-turn, or picking the bike back up if it goes over. It's heavy, at low speeds, and genuinely not ideal for smaller or newer riders. There's also a specific used market check worth doing here. Kawasaki recalled roughly 13,000 Concours 14s from model years 2008 to 2012 for a rear brake pedal issue where trapped debris could cause brake drag, overheating, and potential rear brake lockup or failure. It's not that the Concours 14 has a reputation for bad brakes, it's that any example from model years 2008 to 2012 needs its recall history verified before you buy, the same way you'd check the Vulcan or the H2 SX further down this list. And because these are aging used bikes now, you're also looking at fairing labor and big bike maintenance costs that don't show up on the sticker price. The Concours 14 isn't unreliable, it's simply a bike where cheap to buy and cheap to own are two very different promises. If a sport tourer can quietly become a heavy aging risk, picture what happens when you take that same formula and build an entire cruiser platform around long-haul comfort. This is where the list starts getting serious, because this is where a genuine safety recall enters the picture. The 2026 Vulcan 1700 Vaquero ABS starts at $19,999, and the Voyager ABS has been priced around $20,199, pricing that positions these bikes as a Japanese alternative to a Harley-Davidson Tourer. For a lot of riders, that's exactly the appeal: big cruiser comfort and looks without the big cruiser brand premium. Here's what mechanics want you to know before you chase that deal on the used market. There's a documented NHTSA recall covering model year from 2009 to 2015 Vulcan 1700 Voyagers, and from 2011 to 2015 Vulcan 1700 Vaqueros, an estimated 11,836 units, where an ignition wire could chafe against the fuel tank, short circuit, and stall the engine at speed. If you're shopping used and your bike falls in those model years, checking whether that recall work has actually been completed on your specific VIN isn't optional. It's the single most important thing you can do before handing over money. Beyond the recall, these are heavy, aging touring cruisers, and weight plus age is a combination that punishes buyers who assume cruiser automatically means easy to ride. Smaller or newer riders in particular can find themselves genuinely intimidated by a bike this size once it's off the showroom floor and into real-world parking lots, gas stations, and low-speed maneuvering. This isn't a case of the Vulcan being junk or being unable to compete with Harley. It's a case of a heavy, recall-affected used motorcycle needing real verification before purchase, something too many buyers skip because they're excited about the price. Now we're in genuinely exotic territory, and the honest truth is this: the Ninja H2 is not an unreliable motorcycle. Nobody credible is going to tell you the engineering is flawed. What mechanics will tell you is that it's financially irrational for the average rider, and that irrational is exactly what makes it dangerous to a buyer's bank account rather than to their body. The 2026 Ninja H2 ABS starts at $34,400. The Ninja H2 Carbon ABS climbs to $38,100. That's not motorcycle pricing anymore. That's exotic car adjacent pricing, for a machine most owners will use a small fraction of on public roads. Ownership brings expensive tires, expensive insurance, expensive servicing, and expensive consumables relative to a normal street bike, and the performance on tap is mostly unusable anywhere except a closed track. This is a bike built for collectors and engineering enthusiasts who understand exactly what they're buying and why. It becomes a mistake the moment someone buys it because it's the fastest, most prestigious Kawasaki they can imagine, without pricing out what feeding it actually costs every single month. As irrational as the H2 can be, at least it's honest about what it is. Our number one entry is dangerous precisely because it disguises exotic complexity as everyday practicality. This is the strongest hidden trap on the entire list, and here's exactly why. The Ninja H2 SXC looks like the responsible choice. It's marketed as a sport tourer, hard bags available, more upright ergonomics, a practical supercharged Kawasaki you could theoretically commute on and tour with. That practicality is precisely what makes it dangerous. At $29,999, it costs almost as much as the standard H2 while asking buyers to believe they're making the sensible choice instead of the exotic one. Underneath that touring-friendly bodywork is still a supercharged engine, still layers of complex electronics, and still a bike engineered far beyond what normal touring actually requires. And there's a specific, documented reason to be cautious buying one used. Kawasaki issued an NHTSA recall covering model year from 2018 to 2021 Ninja H2 SX, H2 SX SE, and H2 SX SE plus motorcycles, about 857 units, after finding that insufficient grease in the rear hub needle bearing could cause the bearing to fail and, in the worst case, lock the rear wheel. That is not a claim about every H2 SX SE built. It's a specific real recall tied to specific model years, and any used buyer needs to confirm it's been completed before they take the bike home. To be absolutely clear, this doesn't mean every H2 SX model has rear wheel problems, and it doesn't mean the platform is unsafe. It means that on a motorcycle this complex and this expensive, skipping the recall check on a 2018 to 2021 example is a mistake with genuinely severe consequences attached. Combine that recall risk with the near $30,000 price of admission, the electronics complexity, and the reality that most owners bought it believing they were getting a practical touring machine, and you have the single clearest example on this entire list of a brilliant motorcycle becoming a terrible decision for the wrong buyer. Mechanics aren't scared of the engineering. They're cautious about recommending it to someone who thinks sport tourer means simple. Here's the pattern this entire list has been building toward, and the H2 SX SE is where it becomes impossible to ignore. The most dangerous purchase on this list was never the bike that looked exotic and expensive. Buyers approach those with their guard up. The most dangerous purchase is the bike that looks reasonable. Hard bags, upright seating. The word touring, right there in how it's marketed. That's exactly the kind of bike that gets bought on confidence instead of research, and confidence doesn't check recall databases. A buyer chasing the $38,100 H2 Carbon already knows they're stepping into exotic territory and tends to do their homework. A buyer chasing the practical H2 SX SC often doesn't think they need to, and that's precisely the gap where a rear bearing recall on a used 2018 to 2021 bike turns into a genuinely dangerous mechanical failure instead of a 5-minute dealership fix. None of these 7 motorcycles are bad. That's the part most riders still refuse to believe, because we've been trained to think recommended against means poorly built. It doesn't. Every bike on this list is capable, respected, and in the right hands, genuinely excellent. What separates a smart purchase from an expensive regret was never the motorcycle. It was always the buyer, the used bike history, the recall paperwork nobody bothered to check, and the honest question of whether you're buying the bike you need or the bike you're dreaming about. The next time a Kawasaki catches your eye, don't ask if it's a good motorcycle. Ask if it's a good motorcycle for you, right now, with your budget, your experience, and your patience for what ownership actually costs after the sale is done. The best mechanics don't warn you away from great machines. They warn you away from buying great machines for the wrong reasons. If this saved you from making one of these 7 mistakes, subscribe, because the next video might just save your engine too.